Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about the mobility nerfs, or changes I guess I should say, that have finally been posted by a rioter over on Twitter. I will have the main post link down in the description below in case you want to take a look at it yourself, but hoo boy, there's a lot to talk about here, so I kind of want to hop in. If this sounds a little off the cuff, it kind of sort of is. They just posted it, so I will be kind of going through these. I've already been through it once, but I do want to talk a little bit more about what these changes mean overall for the game. First up, the big one here. Stridebreaker, admittedly, is taking a big hit here as Halting Slash no longer has a dash attached. Even as short as it was, 300 unit dash was still enough for a lot of fighters to just sort of close that gap and get that little tiny bit of extra mobility that they really shouldn't have. It's the kind of dash that allows Darius to suddenly be incredibly scary. Garen is incredibly scary with just that little bit of extra dash because these champions are bounced around the fact that they have no mobility. The second you give them even a little bit of tiny extra mobility, they just become really, really powerful overall. However, I know everyone is already about to complain and cry about the death of Stridebreaker, but basically every other part of Stridebreaker got buffed as compensation to this. Like every other part. The Halting Slash damage ratio is literally doubled. The slow is now a 90% slow that decays over 3 seconds as opposed to 40% decaying over 2. The cooldown is shorter, so it's only 15-second cooldown, and it can be cast while moving now. On top of that, the item itself gives you an additional 200 health that it didn't used to, in exchange for losing 10 movement speed and the Mythic passive going down by 1% of movement speed. What this means overall is that this item is a little bit less about mobility in general. This is still the item to build if you want to go more of a movement speed build approach. But generally speaking, this item is just more about holding enemy team members next to you once you're able to get in. So if you're Darius and you've gotten the teleport flank in, you can still go Stridebreaker because it has the ability to get in the middle of the enemy team and then Halting Slash them and hold them in place. It also means that if you're running down an enemy champion who's just a little bit ahead of you, because you can cast Halting Slash without stopping your movement, you're able to press the button, get the slow, because remember the AoE is pretty generous on this as well. So if you have like Dead Man's Plate, for example, and you're running them down, you have the ability to just get close enough to slow them with Halting Slash and then be able to close the rest of the gap to continue wailing on them with your axe, right? I'm not gonna lie, this is still a big nerf to the item, and it's gonna feel a lot worse than it used to be for sure. I'm not gonna disagree with that at all, but the buffs they've given in compensation, I would say, are more than enough to compensate for the lack of the dash. You do want to feel like this item is more like Tiamat with a slow, rather than the old version of the item where it gave you that little tiny bit of extra mobility that you were missing, but it does mean that if you're able to generally get close enough to an enemy champion, hit a minion, for example, proc your movement speed, get a little bit closer, and then hit them with the Halting Slash, you do have the ability to kind of make plays and set yourself up in that regard. This is going to be worse for champions that needed that little bit of extra mobility, and it does make it a little bit better if you're able to get actually into a fight though. So in that regard, it is in a good spot. Like I said, it's going to feel a little bit bad, but generally speaking, I feel like at least Riot have thrown a ton of buffs at it afterwards in order to make it feel still good to build. Training Force has lost a little bit of movement speed on hit in exchange for a little bit of attack damage. That's not really that big of a deal. That's just one of those small tweaks where Riot is trying to generally adjust the movement speed in the game down a little bit further in exchange for giving the item some other stats. Force of Nature is another big one that I feel like is really missing the mark here. Riot have said that it no longer stacks magic resistance and movement speed upon taking magic damage, but now it has the unique passive where when you're immobilized, you regenerate 8% of your maximum health over 4 seconds. Now, in one regard, this is kind of a nice buff. Every time you eat a mobility or a CC spell, right, you're able to sort of regenerate that maximum health, which makes you just that much harder to kill. The problem I have with this, though, is that there are so many places where you used to build Force of Nature and so many matchups where you used to build this item that now are no longer there and are no longer relevant, and it sort of drops Force of Nature's niche out a little bit, right? Force of Nature was kind of an item that a lot of players adapted to following the removal of Adaptive Helm, right? Adaptive Helm was the go-to item to build against damage over time mages, or especially champions with a lot of multi-hit abilities. Gwen, for example, would have been severely nerfed by Adaptive Helm. Rumble's another champion that suffers against Adaptive Helm. And Force of Nature, while it wasn't Adaptive Helm, did at least give you a version of Adaptive Helm by saying, I'm going to take the Flame Spitter damage, but every tick of Flame Spitter is going to give me more magic resistance and movement speed to either let me run Rumble down on the backside, run away from Rumble, or just gain more magic resistance to then take less damage from him afterwards, right? And the best thing about it, though, was that everything gave you it, right? Every time you took magic damage from an ability, you gained another stack of Force of Nature, so you didn't really care if you were taking damage because it's stacking you up and making you beefier. now you can eat basically as much poke as you want. You can take a Malzahar Q when he's got Leandri's Torment and Demonic Helm, and you're just straight up going to lose all of the health without any bonuses. You're not stacking magic resistance, you're not regenerating health, and Force of Nature's stat package already was not very good. You really needed that item at maximum stacks in order to make it worth buying. Now that it no longer has those stats, I actually think it's going to be bad. If these changes go through without any additional buffs to Force of Nature, it's not going to be worth buying, just straight up. And I feel like that's a bad place to be, especially given that Rumble and Gwen are still kind of running around in pro play causing problems, right? This is one of the best items in the business at dealing with them, and if it's not an option, well, they're going to be very much so an option. Moving on to Black Cleaver, it's gaining additional maximum health in exchange for losing movement speed per stack of Carve. Again, not a huge deal. The movement speed did get nerfed by quite a bit here, but it's one of those just systemic tweaks downwards. Given that people never really built Cleaver in the first place, I feel like this is probably fine. Dead Man's Plate, this is an important one here. The charge time is down to 4 seconds from 8 seconds, so you get to maximum speed much more quickly. However, the maximum movement speed is down to 40 from 60, so you're not going to go nearly as fast. However, the damage on hit, the base damage was nerfed, but now it scales with 100% of your base AD. So generally speaking, when you do get that Dead Man's Plate hit, you're going to hit a lot harder and it's a lot faster to charge. This means that when you're in, for example, that situation I talked about before, Darius either coming for a teleport flank or trying to run somebody down afterwards, you're going to get to that maximum movement speed a lot more quickly. And when you do finally get in, you're going to hit like a truck off the back of that as well. So that's a pretty nice change to DMP. Obviously, it sucks that it is losing movement speed, but in exchange, I think it's a pretty hefty buff. Death's Dance is getting its heal on champion takedown increased by 5% to 15%, but it no longer gives you movement speed on takedown. This means that Death's Dance is a little bit better at helping you survive a teamfight situation. You get that first kill, you get just that little bit of extra healing in order to keep going in the teamfight, in exchange for losing out on the movement speed that you might have used to run down enemy team members who are fleeing the fight afterwards. I still think it's going to be a good item, but definitely losing the movement speed does hurt it a little bit. I feel like it's probably fair either way. Gale Force Mythic's passive has been nerfed down from 3% movement speed to 2% movement speed, same as Stridebreaker. Gale Force's active has not been touched at all. I don't think that's too big of a deal here because, like I said before, AD carries aren't kind of one-size-fits-all. You have the option of opting into Gale Force, and Gale Force's cooldown also is much longer. AD carries have to be a lot more cognizant of when they used it, whereas a lot of fighters is just kind of yes, please on Stridebreaker, right? So I feel like this is probably fine in that regard. Prowler's Claw has a pretty big change here. The cooldown has not only been increased by half a minute to 90 seconds, but the active target can now only target enemy champions. This is not going to change it in regard to champions like Rek'Sai or Pyke that are using it to dash to champions in order to get their CC abilities off, but it does mean that if you're trying to use the dash to get in range of your CC abilities like Pantheon players would do, that is no longer an option. You have to target an enemy champion with this ability. I think that's probably a fair nerf, but it's not getting any buffs and compensation. This is all just nerfs to Prowler's Claw, but I feel like it's probably fine given that Assassins already have the best in class mobility, right? Like, Assassins are known for their mobility, and Prowler's Claw says, hey, we heard you like mobility, so here's some more mobility, right? So I feel like this is probably a fine nerf. It still gives you more mobility. It still gives you the ability to, for example, Prowler's Claw to a tank, and then use your ZW to get to the AD carry, or use your ZR to get to the AD carry who's behind the tank. You still have that as an option, but you don't have the sort of cheeky dash through a minion or dash through a monster to get a little bit of extra movement to get in range. So I feel like it's fine. Trellis Battle Song is another item that I feel like Riot are a bit missing the mark on. The movement speed active is now only 30% movement speed non-decaying as opposed to 60% decaying movement speed. On one hand, I feel like the 30% non-decaying means that it's better over the long run while you're trying to run down enemy champions, but on the other hand, I feel like it doesn't stand out enough. Getting the big burst of movement speed right off the bat really made Trellis feel like a go button for the team, whereas now it just kind of says you're a little bit faster. In some regards, this is going to be good, and I feel like the biggest thing is Trellis already just didn't stand out amongst the support mythics especially, so now that it doesn't give you that extra movement speed and has no compensatory buffs, I feel like it's just not going to be an item that anyone builds anymore. Lichbane lost a little bit of movement speed in exchange for more AP, similar to how I talked about Trinity Force changes up above. It's just kind of a shuffle around. I don't feel like it's that important. Cosmic Drive has a bit of an interesting change here. The movement speed no longer scales with level, but it's at a flat 20, which means that it actually is better when you buy it first or second than it was before, and the ability power also went up. This means that Cosmic Drive is actually a really good item if you're playing for like an early stage kind of build. So for example, you're Xerath and you don't want to go Deathcap because you're doing well early and you want to shut out the game as fast as possible. You can build a Cosmic Drive second, and it actually feels pretty good because you get the more movement speed, you get additional AP, you're not opting into the scaling build, but you're hoping the game's going to end faster than your opponents can, recover, right? So in that regard, I feel like this change is a little interesting. It does cut some mobility out of the game, but especially early on, like I said, first or second item, you're going to like this item. And finally, Nimbus Cloak has gotten yet another nerf. Surprise, surprise, Nimbus Cloak is really hard to balance. But the threshold at max threshold is now 25% as opposed to 35%. At this point, Riot just removed Nimbus Cloak or rework it again. I feel like no one is going to take it at 25% movement speed per summoner spell cast. It's just not all there. So in general, I just feel like at this point, it's kind of beating a dead horse, right? Like, why is Nimbus Cloak still here? Why is it still getting nerfed? But I guess Riot really want to tamp down on mobility. So in general, I feel like these changes are all really interesting. The Stridebreaker changes in particular, I know a lot of people are going to be really sad about, myself included, but I can't be altogether too upset with it. I do feel like it was really cutting out an intended weakness of fighters especially, and so in general, I feel like it was probably fair, and a lot of the other changes on here aren't strictly speaking buffs or nerfs. Stridebreaker, I still want to build, I still want to find out how this item is going to feel, because I do feel like it has the option of being really, really good and really powerful, so either way. But let me know what you guys think of any of this down in the comment section below. If you're already here for the Stridebreaker is dead party, please let me know that down in the comment section below. Or if you're here for the Cosmic Drive first item party, right? Like, I think that could be maybe a spicy option here. So let me know all that down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.